Good morning to all. So on behalf of M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation and HCL Foundation, we welcoming you all for the MSS 100 webinar series titled Celebrating Professor M.S. Swaminathan Legacy in Fisheries and Coastal Resource Management, which aims to provide a platform for the experts and the practitioners to discuss the various coastal related issues, including ecosystem based fisheries management, innovative technologies, policy advocacies, integrated coastal zone management, etc., etc. So you all aware of that, the Professor Swaminathan contribution in agriculture, but more than agriculture, he has also contributed for the coastal and fisheries sector. So one of the first program of the foundation, the coastal system research, it was during 1989. So when Professor started this program, he always emphasized that two important focus. One is the integration of the ecological security of the coastal areas, and other one is the livelihood security of the coastal communities. So these two things always going into a parallel way, and it is mutually reinforcing manner to achieve the sustainable management of the coastal resources. So with this thing, and there's a today this webinar topic, the changing context of small scale fishers access to coastal and marine comms. It is more relevant to his vision, and we have an excellent speaker with us today, Mr. Venkatesh Salagrama. I welcome you all for this important webinar. My colleague, Dr. Meera, she is the facilitator for this for today webinar session. I request her to introduce the speaker as well as to facilitate the question and interaction session of the today webinar. So with this small introduction, I welcome you all for this important webinar. Over to Meera.
I can speak. Okay, so welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce Venkatesh. Venkatesh and he's a former colleague and a good friend. Venkatesh has over 35 years of experience working with marine small-scale fishing communities around the world, with a particular focus in South and Southeast Asian fisheries. As an independent consultant, he has undertaken several research and development assignments for many organizations such as the UNFAO, the World Bank, DFID, and several regional and bilateral development programs. His work experience has spanned post-harvest value chain development, coastal poverty and livelihoods, fisheries policy, law and institutions, migration and livelihoods, diversification, women in fisheries, marketing, global trade, credit, finance, vulnerable and marginalized people, and natural disasters and climate change. Basically everything that concerns coastal communities. His recent work has covered research studies on the livelihoods and vulnerabilities of older people in fishing, and assessment of coastal tenure in relation to small-scale fisheries of India. Venkatesh has published several studies and reports and has authored or contributed to several FAO technical papers. And of course, he lives in a coastal town. He lives in Kakinada in Andhra Pradesh. And Venkatesh is a very engaging speaker, and he has a great sense of humor. So I request everyone to listen in to what he has to say in this webinar. We'll take the Q&A afterwards. Over to you, Venkatesh.
Thank you, Meera. Thank you for inviting me to deliver this lecture, and thanks to MSSRF for this wonderful opportunity. When they actually prepared the announcement for this lecture, they gave me an honorary doctorate. I was Dr. Venkatesh. I was so pleased. I was going to keep it after the workshop also. Unfortunately, I think they revised the announcement, and relegated me back to being a Mr. Venkatesh. So if my thanks are not really very profuse, you know the reason why. So let me see how I can present my paper. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. It's only last week that I realized that the title I have chosen for the lecture is so dull and dreary that even I wouldn't attend a lecture like this. But having said that, I'll try my best to make it interesting and, more importantly, topical, because it raises certain significant issues relating to coastal people and the way they engage with the with the resources. So I'll hopefully be able to, by the end of this presentation, give you some idea of a very serious challenge being faced by small scale fishing communities in India but also elsewhere. So let me start with a quick definition, as I understand it, of what commons are, so that we know we are all on the same page. Commons, unlike in agriculture, where people have ownership of land, when it comes to coastal fisheries, marine fisheries, capture fisheries as such, they are dealing with common property resources, which are open access, as we'll discuss in a minute. Commons are those resources held in common by a group of people with similar kind of dependencies, and access to such resources is managed, regulated, and controlled in rule systems which have evolved with the consent of all users. That's what I mean by commons throughout this presentation. Why are the commons important? Why do we need to look at it? And obviously, they are the traditional basis of livelihoods for fishers and a number of fish workers. And more critically, over the past 20, 30 years, they've also become the most important assets of the assetless. Meera just mentioned about a study we did about older people, and we discovered literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people whose access to commons allows them to survive. And the question is, what happens when those commons are no longer available to these poorer people? And the advantage with commons is also that the resources are so diverse that a wide range of categories of people, from the poorest to the richest, from the youngest to the oldest, and irrespective of gender, sex, age, everything, they could all make a livelihood out of it. And more importantly, this is an important point I want to make, the dependence on commons transcends just utilitarian values. People don't depend on it to make a living, because the dependence on commons over a period of time gives rise to a number of engagements which define a whole way of life, and eventually it gives rise to a cultural identity. When we call somebody as a small scale fisher, you may not even we don't even have an accepted definition of what small scale fishers are, but we all can know when we meet with a person as a small scale fisher. So this cultural identity comes from their dependence upon the commons. And it also defines their whole world view. Commons determine people's understanding of engagement with the wider world, whether it is the markets or the government. In fact, if you look at the history of fishers' engagement with the government, you will see that they are treating government as yet another commons. They are engaging with as something that they could extract something out of for their personal and community-based needs. So there is an existential significance to dependence on commons, which undermines all our efforts at coming up with alternative livelihoods, looking at particular sets of physical resources, technical resources, capacity building, and so forth. It is as practical alternative livelihoods, given the cultural connotations of fishing. Alternative livelihoods is about as practical as eating pizzas when rice is not available. So what commons are we talking about? Again, everybody has a certain idea of what commons are: fish, water, so forth. I would like to expand the idea a little more. Commons extend to both aquatic and terrestrial spheres. In the aquatic sphere, we need to distinguish between different ecosystems, aquarian ecosystems, the near shore, offshore, backwaters, lakes, estuaries, floodplains. The reason why we need to distinguish between different sets of commons is that different categories of people with different levels of engagement and with different ways of dealing with the resources that they have access to apply. And some of the resources like backwaters, lakes, estuaries, even inshore, near-shore waters, intertidal regions, these offer livelihood security for the poorest of the poor and the more vulnerable groups. Older people, I already mentioned, there are women, they all have a dependence on sets of ecosystems within the aquatic environment, and unless we we understand their dependencies accordingly, coming with a common policy to address everybody at one go is not likely to work. On the terrestrial front, important commons include living and social spaces. One of the important issues we need to keep in mind is that many fishers don't have access, they don't have deeds to the houses that they live on. They live on commons. And that is actually increasingly making life very difficult for them. Their existence itself is becoming more difficult. Beaches are another terrestrial common, mangroves and Porambok and public lands. Here, water bodies, grazing lands, toilets. This is an important point as relating to particularly women. Most fishing communities are characterized, as anybody who has ever visited a coastal area would know. Most people, most communities are characterized by commons being utilized as toilets that may not look good for us, but that is the only source people have to a toilet. And for the women in particular, this poses a particularly important, particularly sensitive issue, and they depend on public lands for that purpose. And market spaces, in a physical sense, markets also are a commons. And besides the aquatic and terrestrial spheres, we also need to look into the intangible commons. People have access to certain commons which have no physical presence, but which influence their lives, livelihoods in significant ways. Caste obviously is an important. And market systems, I'll discuss that in a minute, but markets play a critical role. Access to markets defines how a person or a group of people make sense of their life and livelihood. And government services access to government services is, again, as I said, people engage with the government as though it is a commons. And microfinance institutions are probably one of the modern commons that we have experienced in the community level. So a combination of these diverse resources and services gives rise to unique, locally appropriate, indigenous innovations in terms of processes, practices, and systems. And I'd like to take you to through one case study on fish smoking. Fish smoking in the Godavari Delta. It's not that fish is smoking, I just put that as a joke. Look, that activity, fish smoking, is entirely dependent on commons, but these commons are so uncommon that you cannot replicate elsewhere in the world. It can happen only in that particular area. The boats and gears that are used for estuarian fishing are designed to fit with the commons and how to take advantage of them. The catch, mullets, eels, shrimp, these are specific species. It's not like you could use any fish for smoking. People need only these species for smoking because they smoke better than any other species anyway, and the markets don't accept anything else. Look at the smoking hut, the place where actual smoking is undertaken. You can see that almost every part of the hut is is coming out of of a estuarine or local material. So commons are again playing an important role in developing it. Firewood, the firewood is wood that is locally available from the common public lands, coconut husk, mangrove wood, and even cow pats. These are all commons again. And a platform that is used for smoking the fish, again local material. And importantly, actual smoking is itself a common activity. It is not one woman who does the whole thing, or at least it used not to be one woman. Over a period of time, obviously, it has become more personalized. But in the early stages, women would share the responsibility. So commons were coming into picture in a different sense in that level. And the markets for the smoked fish are again very local, they are very niche markets. You cannot simply take the smoked fish to a different market and try to sell it. If you sell the shrimp in this particular market, you will get up to 1200, 1500 rupees a kilogram, but you take it just 20 kilometers away to a neighborhood market, nobody would even touch it. So the point I want to make is that commons not only define people's relationship with livelihoods, but they also give them a security and allow them to develop technologies and systems and processes and markets in line with them. So how did the people manage the commons in fishing communities? Historically, when people depended on natural resources, naturally they needed to manage the resource in such a way that they could get four benefits out of it. Number one, ensuring access and use rights to users within the group. Everybody should have access to the resource. Everybody should be able to use the resource. And so different users had different kinds of access rights. Within the fishing activity, there were different fishing systems. And there again, between fishers and fish traders, there is a different set of domain in existence and so forth. Then secondly, they needed to ensure equity of access. The poorer or the less active participants in the process should have the same amount of access as the richer and more technically advanced systems. So that again is an important area. Equity of access tended to be the most important component of the customary systems. Third one, establish the groups or at least the communities' claims over the resource. It could be by variety, space, quantity, or quality, so that they could could avoid competition and conflict with others, again from other villages, from other castes, other groups, other categories. Finally, the community systems also developed mechanisms for effective enforcement of rules. One of the important challenges we face with most policies, even well-minded, well-intentioned policies, is the lack of enforcement. And in the at the community level, when you look into the customary governance systems, you can see a very elaborate system for effective enforcement of rules, which included redressal mechanisms. In India, especially in South India, caste played a role in defining the customary management systems. Katta Panchayats in Tamil Nadu, we have multiple categories of governance systems in Andhra Pradesh, and wherever you go, you have caste-based systems. Even in states, even in areas where non-Hindu fishers dominated, as in the southern tip of Tamil Nadu or West or Kerala, even there you will find caste somehow played a role in pulling people together and allowing them to manage their resources. Caste helped to keep systems compact. It could also exclude people more easily because it was easier to say who is a fisherman, who is not a fisherman, who belonged and who did not belong. And the rights also were clearer. But on the other hand, over time, its limitations became more apparent. A lot of things that we don't have the time to get into. But the point I want to make is that everywhere, wherever you have marine fishing, coastal fishing and marine fishing in capture happening, they had elaborate systems to manage their commons. It is so obvious a necessity that the question is not whether they exist or existed, but where they do not, why did they not? That was the question we should be looking at. And why did the community-based, commons-based management, customary governance system work? The customary tenure systems were not focused exclusively on fisheries management, fish conservation, or any, are only relating to the livelihood aspects of the people. Customary tenure systems worked as a nested system which covered social, economic, political, institutional, and a whole range of activities, functions that they had to be obeyed if people needed to get the benefits they wanted out of them. If I needed to get my daughter married off, it was the village elders who looked into the system. If I needed to, if there is a fight between a man and his wife, it is the village elders who looked after this question. If two households were fighting over something, it is the village elders which looked after that. If the village had to celebrate a festival or arrange some kind of a community program, it is again the village elders who took the role on. So all that, and when I have a problem with some government policy or government police department or fisheries department, it was again the the village elders who were helping me out with all those things, which meant that I am getting a number of services from having the system in place and in obeying that system. If I don't obey in one rule, if I don't obey one rule, it is like it is tantamount to floating the whole, and I'd be excommunicated. I would be losing the access to all those resources, all the support. So ready and local access, it is happening in the village. Then quick redressal mechanisms, because every time there is a challenge, they would immediately resolve it in the village itself. There is a lot of transparency involved because all decisions were made in public with all the villagers sitting around and discussing things threadbare, and accountability in decision making. All this has meant that the traditional systems, the customary systems were acceptable and their rules were enforceable. Of course, it needs to be accepted that the systems worked at the local level. Once the fisheries itself moved from the local to higher levels, the systems could not really scale themselves up very naturally. So, enter modernization, 1960s to 1980s. Modernization of fisheries was based upon the premise the government of India and the different state governments have played a critical role in modernization of fisheries through the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and it was based upon the premise that coastal and marine fisheries were not commons but open access. Anybody with the money, resources, and technology can go fish, and it is a mindset that remains true till date. And this has meant that commons-based systems, the customary governance systems, were overlooked in favor of new technologies like trawlers, investments, lot more funding coming in, species. Shrimp has become of the mainstay of the Indian fisheries. Markets, because we were no longer looking into the local markets. We started looking into the export markets, and the new actors, people were coming from outside. At least the capital was coming from the outside, and the ownership was resting more with the outsiders. So shrimp and export focus. There are two different actually challenges, because shrimp and export focus has led to intensive fishing in the inshore waters. And inshore waters are precisely where customary tenure existed, which meant that shrimp and export focus meant undermining the strength of the customary systems. And any friction this may have given rise to in between the small scale and the modern fishing systems was addressed by providing opportunities to the small fishers also to intensify and diversify. That is basically co-opting them to get on the bandwagon. And this meant further weakening of customary systems hold on them. On the landward side, new institutional mechanisms, cooperatives, public Panchayati Raj institutions and departments of fisheries and multiple other government departments spread their reach into the villages, and all of them played a role in undermining the existing customary arrangements. And most critically of all, markets. Until 1960s, 70s, you don't find much reference to markets in any literature on small scale fisheries, especially in the coastal and marine fisheries context. Markets were always important, markets have always been important, but they never really played an influential role in deciding who fished, where one fished, what one fished for, and how. All these things came to be handled by the markets, and markets have become a formidable player in defining, deciding, influencing, regulating, and managing fishing. And where markets decided in one direction, no customary system or no fisher community, no, not even the government department of fisheries could suggest or behave otherwise. Then that led to 1990s, stage 2 in our development story. This led to unrestricted growth of fishing intensity, in which we have to accept small scale fishers too participated, led to, of course, reduced fish catches, changes in fish composition, availability, distribution. Then more critically, it led to overcapitalization, increased costs of operation, declining margins. 60% of a fishing boat's gross income was going to pay for the fuel alone. And that meant a huge depletion in the amount that a fisherman could take home, but alongside an increase in the risks, the financial risks that a boat owner carried. And this led to the development of export and distant urban markets with ice and exports, has led to marginalization of small scale actors, especially women. We'll come back to that in a minute, but one has to accept that modernization process has marginalized women, gave them bit parts in the story. And finally, competition and conflicts increased despite a number of incentives being given to both sides of the story. And within the systems themselves, within the small scale fisheries themselves, there were increasing conflicts. There were a lot of issues. Many of you would remember the recent story of ring scenes and how they have been contributing to significant friction within the villages, including violence and murders and so forth. The Marine Fishing Regulation Acts are supposed to address these things, but unfortunately they went somewhere else. Their target practically moved away from ensuring equity. So anyway, all that has meant that there has been a reduction in fish species, and there was an awareness that fish in the sea were not infinite. And institutional efforts for conservation and management of fisheries led to restricted or no access to fishers based on season, species, space, or method of fishing. Go to any state in India, you will find some kind of restrictions, seasonal or species related or ecosystem related, and no-take zones for small fishes. All this happened at the expense of existing customary systems. Again, that needs to be kept in mind. Restricted to no access, we have moved, and alongside the existing customary management systems also were sidelined. Conservation efforts severely curtailed fishers' access to commons, reducing vulnerability of operations, requiring them to look elsewhere, or flout regulations. The latter is what many people had to or were forced to do. So conservation seldom considered local needs and dependencies and ignored customary arrangements, resulting in band-aid solutions. To expect a few fishers from stopping a few fishers from using a mangrove resource would rejuvenate the mangroves was a band-aid solution, because the reason why mangroves were disappearing had to do with a lot of other processes underway, and unless and until all the larger processes were taken into account, by simply looking at the small fishers and their small dependence on a few mangrove dried pieces of wood is not going to help anybody. So in the end, it meant that fishers lost their livelihoods with little perceptible improvement in resource health. As recently somebody was saying, they were writing the epitaph for some sensitive resource. For 30 years we have had conservation, and now you are saying that people are writing epitaphs. What then do we need to ask? Is the conservation measure right? So alongside the conservation measures, 1990s also saw aquaculture being promoted as an alternative to fishing. When people can't have rice to eat, let them have pizzas. then never again worked. It weakened further the fishers' access to commons, both physically and institutionally, and it created its own set of issues, and that we are living with even now. So comes the 21st century, where we are into full-fledged liberalization of commons. It's basically liberating the commons in a way that the local communities, local people are practically thrown out of the story. Post-liberalization, India woke up to the economic potential of coastal and marine spaces. So the resources that once constituted common property under the customary guidance management systems then became open access when modernization came along, then became no regulated access systems under the conservation regimes, have now become private property, are now becoming a private property. A large part of the coastal area, large swaths of coastal commons are being parceled out and privatized for industrial development, which is an ongoing process in every coastal state. In fact, 2/3 of the coastline of Andhra Pradesh currently is under development for one reason, one activity or the other. Any activity except fishing, obviously. And village commons got fenced in as private property. People lost long-standing claims to them. Access and productivity of commons also declined as a result of closure of creeks, pollution, and a lot of other things. And new developments like ports involved uprooting communities by omission or by commission, resulting in massive displacements characterized by inadequate, ill-thought-out, and inappropriate compensation packages. That's a challenge one can discuss for a long time, so I'll just jump over it. At sea, shipping, oil exploration, and other development activities affect fishers' access to fishing and upset fisheries in the inshore waters as well. And the ongoing blue economy and blue transformation processes lead to single-minded pursuit of economic gain at the expense of customary dependence on the resources. This is the story until now. Adding fuel to the fire, we now have a lot of demographic pressures coming from from the landward side, and also climate change. Human factors like increasing pollution, reduced inflows, and water exchange mechanisms by construction of dams, and new roads and ports are increasing pressure, and demographic and urbanization stresses are expanding everywhere. And unsustainable utilization of natural resources is a natural result of so much activity. And exacerbating this issue is the climate change. Until recently, climate change was aggravating whatever is happening as a result of human actions. But now we are seeing evidence that the climate change processes are speeding up and becoming independently significant, which means that until now we have one problem which is being aggravated, but now we are actually going to see two sets of problems affecting the coastal and marine environment and the people depending on it. Erosion is an issue which comes as a result of both human actions as well as a result of climate change, and nowhere along the coast anywhere in India is safe from erosion, accretion, and siltation. Each of those three things, people think erosion is an issue, but not so much the accretion. But unfortunately, erosion, siltation, accretion all have their own impacts on people's lives and livelihoods, and they are increasing. And with more development being planned everywhere, we have in Andhra Pradesh itself 14 new ports coming up, fishing ports coming up, and the same number I think is being mentioned in case of Odisha. And every state has its own plans to build new ports into the sea, which may help certain groups of people, but it cannot. It actually can aggravate the ongoing erosion processes. So a situation is arising where access to the commons, even if available, which is again a doubtful proposition, it is unlikely to yield expected benefits to traditional dependents. Impacts of changes in access to commons are the extent of commons diminished in quantity, variety, and quality, productivity, and their access to traditional users are severely restricted or curtailed. Competition and conflicts are happening. Poor returns have been the norm, and increasing risks, both physical and financial, and reduced incomes have been the norm. the challenges are happening at the sea, and people are having to cope with them. But even more serious than that are the challenges on the landward side. As one fisherman told us recently, when you have competition with another fishing gear and a fishing system, you could go farther out, you could go elsewhere at sea. But in the landward side, when your own living space is coming under increasing pressure, you get squeezed in, and there is no way you could go, and erosion is eating away the coast, so you have to move backwards. But there is no space backwards which the people could easily go into and construct their houses in. And squeezing of lands, living spaces, deprivation of access to beaches and mangroves, alienation, marginalization, and frequently outright eviction from coastal spaces is having catastrophic consequences. And as I mentioned in my very first slide, beyond loss of livelihood options, this means disintegration of the social bonds and ties, cultural identities, and historical arrangements that held up fishing as a way of life. And overall, fishers' sense of being and belonging is affected. The warp and woof that over the social fabric are damaged, and the continued survival and future viability of small scale fisheries itself is under an existential threat. In 10 years' time, one question people like me who have worked with small scale fisheries for over 3 decades, we keep asking each other is whether in 10 years' time we will still have a category called small scale fishers along the coasts. Women and commons. Women have traditionally had claims to commons in many ways. Their needs included critical livelihood needs for fishing. It may not be easily accepted that women in Indian context do go fishing. It is usually considered that fishing is something that only men do. But unfortunately, there is enough evidence from West Bengal, from Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, elsewhere. In every state, the intertidal regions, the estuaries have given space for women to undertake fishing. And more importantly, the women's role has been in relation to fish trade. But for the women's immense contribution to fish trade, most fishing economies in the pre-modernization period would not have survived, because the women were the ones who were actually bringing any money back into the system. And women, as I mentioned, also needed the coastal commons for their domestic and personal needs like drinking water, sanitation, and so forth, and also for social interactions. And customary systems, about which we discussed earlier, they had no overt role for women, but there is evidence that women did play influential roles. This is primarily because women were holding the purse strings. They were the ones who were going into the market, selling the fish, bringing the money back, handing some to men. So even if they are excluded in an ostensible way, in an apparent way from the customary systems, women did play an influential role in defining what needed to do. But once modernization came along, one has to accept that modernization and its aftermath have had a definite anti-women's slant. Immediately on the evolution of modernization, women were relegated from being active economic agents to ancillary actors involved in carrying fish or doing some minor activities, supplementary kind of activities. Even as their work in fish trade contributed significantly to fishing economy, food security of the poor, and domestic well-being, you will not find much by way of development support or focus policy focus to address their needs more accurately, more appropriately, and more adequately. The loss of commons has led to immense hardships for women. One simple example is until 15-20 years ago, every village had its own landing center. All the boats were landing in the village, and the first claimants to the catch were the women. But now, increasingly, as the beaches get shrunken, or there is erosion, or new ports coming in, and our pollution has increased, most boats go on land at centralized harbors, which means that the women who depend on the fish for fresh fish sale or dried fish sale or other kinds of processed fish sale must travel long distances. And in case of some women going to Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, they need to travel up to 100 kilometers to get to the harbor in the morning, and their daily calendars work out to something like 16 to 18 hours of continuous hardship. And this and the historical policy and you don't find anything happening in terms of supporting their access to fish or to the markets from a policy perspective. And historical policy indifference, if not blindness, relating to women continues to marginalize them even today. The PMMSY, Prime Minister Matsya Sampada Yojana, which is a 20,000 crore investment being made into fishing. If you go through the main document of the PMMSY, you will find not one activity that actually addresses the needs of women fish sellers or processed fish sellers. It's all about ornamental fisheries, artificial reefs, and so on and so forth. Not one crore out of the 20,000 crores is coming to help women anywhere directly. And the last point is more for a research purpose. People like I think MSSRF has an important role to play here. How women deal with access to commons historically, how they have dealt with commons historically, is a very complex process and not easily explainable in conventional ways in which tenure and tenure right systems are discussed. I tried to do my best to understand how women manage to have access to tenure to different commons. But I think it is my personal understanding that women have a very subtle, not so easy to understand way of ensuring access to the resources, to the commons. And as a man, perhaps I am unable to understand how to approach this issue. And there is a need to understand how women themselves may develop mechanisms for to deal with the issue of commons. Responses of fishers to changing terms. We need to understand the people's responses in a larger society based on a couple of larger societal transformations. One important transformation that has happened in the small fishing communities in the last 30 years, in the post-liberalization period, has been that a number of small fishing households moved upwards into a more middle class status, and they also inherited middle class outlooks, aspirations, attitudes, and ambitions, which means that they don't really look at fishing as a preferred profession. They do continue fishing, but as a last option. And the youth in fishing communities in particular are not really interested in getting into fishing, which means that when commons are being lost, the capacity of the system, the existing system, to raise a challenge to the alienation has not been as strong and significant as it should have been. And the second and more important thing is also that over the past 30 years, you can see a vast amount of change in terms of the people's dependence on government services in states like Andhra Pradesh. A lot of money is coming in, a lot of support is coming in, new houses, new roads, new infrastructure, new facilities, and a lot of entitlements for a number of reasons. People can argue that they are not very sustainable. The kind of support that people are receiving is not sustainable. But for all that, there is a dependence on government which was not there before. And there was this dependence basically defines how people make sense of their lives and livelihoods now, which means that government has become, as I mentioned earlier, government has become a new commons in itself. And that has meant again that people could not really raise their voices against what the government is doing on the coast in terms of development, because at the risk of losing whatever services they are receiving. So overall, weakening ties to fishing, lack of socially cohesive institutions, inability to challenge the government, and vested interests constrain fishers' responses. what we see is a lot of migration. Migration is on the rise, occupational and geographical. It is not always push factors. Migration is never only a desperate measure. That is another important thing we need to keep in mind. People migrate because there are better opportunities elsewhere. But for all that, we see a lot of migration happening in the fishing communities, so much so that even using the phrase fishing communities has become a little uncertain, because a sizable income in many households is coming from non-fisheries activities. And I think this process is likely to continue into the next into the future. So, for all that, we still see a large proportion of people, especially between people of 30 to 50, 60 years age group. A large proportion of people continue to remain in fishing and fish trade for lack of opportunities, resources, skills, or even inclination, because we also need to take into account the cultural inclination to move. And they face considerable uncertainties. They go farther out into the sea now. It is commonly accepted that small fishers have no stake in this deep sea fishing. But unfortunately, that is a fallacy. It is the small fishers who are fishing in the offshore waters. It is the small fishers who are fishing in the deep sea more than any modern fishing method. Fishers go farther out, the land catches in centralized harbors, and increasingly they consume less fish than before. And this has impacts upon their physical, economic, and social well being. And as coasts change, people experience physical dislocations, obviously, but there are also emotional dislocations and disturbances. The psychosocial costs of the change are significant and widespread, but as things stand, I did a study recently among Warda people, but as things stand, we have very little understanding of the psychosocial costs of radical transformations that are happening on the coast, but they are significant. Younger people, as I mentioned, continue to fish as a last resort, and given an alternative, they will shift. But with no really sustainable alternatives in sight, their prospects as fishers look increasingly grim. Overall, if current level of coastal development were to continue, small-scale fisheries would be relegated to the margins. Its capacity to contribute to livelihoods, food and nutritional security, and the national economy will be severely compromised. So what have been the institutional responses to the loss or squeezing of commons? The customary systems, they moved on. Actually, they revamped their role from resource managers to interlocutors with the government for support. And customary systems also have become heavily politicized in every state that they still continue to exist. Cooperatives that never had really an overt management role. They were more economic in orientation and basically a channel to provide subsidies to the people. And they have now largely become defunct anyway. And the government's approach has been consistently pro-development and frequently antagonistic in relation to fishers' rights to commons. Private actors, by which I mean all the private development actors, have a stake in reducing footprint of the fishers on the coast. The one great wish a private sector entrepreneur would have is that there would not be any fishers on the coast by tomorrow morning, if that were possible. Employment generation from the new development activities has been minimal because they're all heavily technologized, and also increasingly AI is being utilized. So what kind of opportunities can be available for, say, a bunch of very poorly trained, educated youngsters from local communities? There are none. There are very few. And the development support channeled through the CSR programs, it is used more as a co-option mechanism. It's basically to buy consent from the communities rather than to make any substantial changes in the way people deal with the resources. And in many states, the civil society organizations, NGOs, have really mounted resistance to new developments. But these have been quite piecemeal, they are issue-based, localized, poorly funded and supported, and ultimately counterproductive to the NGO's own well-being. There were the reaction of the powers that be to NGOs mounting opposition to coastal developments has been quite severe. and that meant loss of identity, loss of ability to function. And the response of civil society itself until 1990s, you had a really good civil society empathy supporting fishermen's rights, fishermen's fights for rights. But the post-liberalization has seen the response of civil society being marked by apathy. There are occasional efforts at doing something about it, but they are mostly cosmetic, and I think it's my personal understanding that they are intended to assuage a guilty consciousness than really meaningful in terms of helping the poor or the fishers. And finally, the role of judiciary and regulatory bodies like the NGT, research institutions, and media, especially the social media. Again, it has been marked by general indifference, as even as coast, a large portions of the coast are being privatized. Large numbers of poor fishers are being marginalized and evicted, and even at the expense of their own well-being, because climate change and issues like climate change are not just the fishers' problem. They are going to affect each of us wherever we live along on the mainland. But there is a case to be made for small fishers to be supported now in their fight against climate change, so that when it comes to our turn tomorrow, we'll know how to deal with it. But it is now a fisher's problem. We are not. There has been nothing but apathy and a general indifference to the fate of the small fishers. So I come to the last part of the presentation. Where do we go from here? In both development and conservation programs, ongoing policies and legislative processes and development, the main stakeholders, i.e. the fishers, are excluded and their rights to commons are overlooked. The priority is to make government at all levels, not just national. So it must be state, because fisheries is a state subject. Government at all levels to understand and appreciate the importance of fisheries and in the need to preserve its access to commons for the greater good of the country. And to make them understand that balancing economic benefits against those in terms of social livelihood, environmental and climate resilience is an important and urgent priority. A major role can be played by organizations such as MSSRF and other research institutions in the government, in the public and the private spheres, in making a case not only for people's access to resources, but also as a mechanism for the greater good of the society. As I mentioned earlier, fishers are the frontline warriors against climate change, and we have a stake in their succeeding in this process. Need to make tenure engage better with civil society, especially youth. And we need to draw upon modern technologies and opportunities for wider and better appreciation of the fishers' cause. And we also need to support the few NGOs that still are fighting what seems to be a losing battle against the alienation of the coast for various developments, to develop in conjunction with communities and the government appropriate national and local strategies for equitable and sustainable management of the commons. There can be 1,001 answers to the issue, but one potential and readily accessible answer that we can pursue could be co-management. Co-management is a commitment by the government and addresses global commitment, government's own commitments to the global priorities like the SDGs, the voluntary guidelines on small-scale fisheries, or the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, the Paris Agreement, and so on and so forth. And the government does show interest, because even the policy documents, current policy documents, new policies that are coming out of the government's from the government, national government, in relation to small-scale fisheries, do highlight the need for co-management. And we have an example of FIMSIL in Tamil Nadu, where co-management was the intended outcome. It didn't reach the level where it could come out of the work, but it is an area that we should be looking at. Co-management has the advantage that it can empower local communities, especially women and vulnerable groups, to have a say in determining what and whether new developments can be allowed and on what terms. So far, people have been using co-management as a catchphrase. Everywhere you go, you find the mention of co-management, and it has been a case of five blind persons describing an elephant. We need to flesh it out. We need to make it work in a way that it makes sense and it works. Co-management can incentivize government to support community empowerment. For coastal and marine resource management and conservation, we are all dealing with illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing issues, ALDFG, that is abandoned, lost, destroyed, discarded fishing gears. And climate change is an issue that covers everybody. There are climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience issues. In all these areas, the government does not have the necessary resources to implement anything really meaningful, where the communities do and have a stake in making that work. And by making a case for community involvement in the management system, we can perhaps enhance their ability to change the processes in a way that the commons will once again become a resource upon which they could develop and generate sustainable livelihoods. And MSSRF and other research and development bodies could also focus on incorporating modern technologies and concepts into commons debate. It's like marine and coastal spatial planning has become the norm in the recent past, and this is an area where we could actually contribute to enhancing the boundaries of the enhancing and protecting the boundaries of the commons on which the poor people, the fisher people survive. Blue carbon and blue justice mechanisms need to be looked into. Eco-labeling, that is markets looking into community-based commons and common managed sustainability can be an area. Biodiversity registers and commit. So there are plenty of opportunities that we can think of once we start looking at co-management as the way forward. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I hope this has provided you in a nutshell, a broad overview of the issues of importance from the commons perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkatesh. That was very interesting and very, it went beyond fisheries. It talked a lot about anthropological issues. It was very, very engaging. So we'll have some questions now. I think we have a lot of people online. So we will, I think Dr. Rama here has a question. She's here. Then we'll first go with, some of us are here physically. So we'll start with Dr. Rama. Then we'll, please raise your hands so that we can take one by one.
Thank you so much. This is Rama Narayanan here, and I really enjoyed your presentation. That 1 hour went by without realizing that 1 hour had gone. Having said that, it's not so much questions, it's certain observations and certain clarifications that I need. One is when you mentioned agriculture, I agree a lot of similarities between agriculture and fisheries also, because in agriculture also people want to leave. Younger people are wanting to leave and there is no gain, so much gain. And though ownership of land is also there, commons exist in agriculture also. For the landless people, especially in the panchayat and the Ur Kattupadu as we call in Tamil, it exists, and on how to manage the common land and who will cultivate and how they will gain out of it. That's what. But I think yours was one of the first presentations in modern times that referred to caste without its only repressive mechanism, but as a mechanism for control of organizing society in a way. I appreciate that, because that fact is very often not seen, overseen. But I also, having said that, I would say that the role of women, my personal observation was more repressive in fishing community when compared to agriculture, because the economic role is very marginalized for women in fishing communities, whereas in agriculture, especially in rice transplantation, we find there is a greater role for them to play. And so these were the two observations that I thought I would discuss with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your very positive feedback. I think the second point about the economic role of women in fishing communities, it needs to be when you look at the historical development of fisheries from the 1940s, 50s, you'll find that women in fishing communities perhaps have had a much bigger economic role than in any other sector. Excuse me?
Somebody has got to
And
mute.
what happened? I think the women really were holding the purse strings, as I mentioned. They were the ones who were practically the link between the fishing activity and the broader society and markets. And they are the usually a woman would go keep a few fish for their own consumption, then carry the rest to the market and bring the money back, and pay a little bit of it to the women to go and have a drink or something. And this economic role that they played gave them a really substantial role to play at the societal level as well, except that, as you say, yes, the caste based customary systems never really gave them their due in an overt manner. But we have documented a number of cases where women from behind the scenes could ensure that more equitable that is, decisions that are more equitable to the needs of the women could be brought into the picture. My point would be that if anything, as I made this clear in the presentation also, if anything, the role that the government has played, the modernization, post-modernization process have played in alienating, marginalizing, and basically reducing the role of women has been far more significant and needs to be looked at very seriously. Importantly, because that is a mindset which continues to prevail even today. As I mentioned, PMMSY does not have any activities for women. So, history being whatever it is, I would say what the government, the policy frameworks, how they deal with women is still an issue that we need to be engaging with more significantly. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Mr. Deepankar Saha, who has raised his hand.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Really, it is a very insightful presentation. I have a couple of questions to you. One is that in 2005, I had the opportunity to work with the conflict resolution in Chilka area after the opening of New Mouth. So do you have any suggestion that in such type of conflict, if over access to the coastal and marine commons between small-scale fisher and other stakeholders, how can it be mitigated? Question number one. Second question is that, do you have any suggestion about the use of digital mapping data tools to help the small-scale fishers to better manage or protect their access to the coastal and marine commons? And lastly, is that what is the policy measure can effectively support the small scale fishers in maintaining the access to the coastal and marine resources in the new changing context?
Okay, thank you, Deepankar. That was important. First question relating conflict resolution. I say, as I tried to do with my case study on smoking, issues tend to be quite local. One of the problems we have with government policy making is the policy gets to be made in Delhi or in Chennai or Hyderabad and gets to be implemented across the board, irrespective of the local specificities and requirements of the people, the needs and the geographical, ecological specificities, and that creates problems. So whatever might have happened in the case of Chilika would have particular specific local issues that need to be taken into account, and that is the way to approach it, rather than we have a lot of toolboxes now, conflict resolution toolboxes in fisheries. I find it rather it's almost a joke actually. You cannot have one global toolbox for conflict resolution, let alone national level one. Or it's impossible to come up with one size fits all solutions to conflict resolution, because the causes, consequences, strategies and outcomes of each conflict have its own independent individual characteristics, and one needs to understand them. So unless and until we get to see the context in which that particular conflict has come come up. One cannot really resolve it easily for sitting in an air-conditioned room like this. The second question relating to digital mapping, yes, a lot of work is happening. I think I'm also fresh into this particular aspect, but I have seen a lot of digital mapping happening in Tamil Nadu and in Pondicherry. The government of India itself has supported with Norwegian support, I think, in Pondicherry and Lakshadweep, developing maps, the coastal and marine spatial maps. And it's a process where a lot of NGOs are also taking the lead and trying to come up with evidence, hard evidence, to prove the people's access to the commons. And I think it is a way we should be actually looking at more seriously, both for its potential implications and also for its potential benefits to fishing communities. The last question, maintaining access, I think it is a challenge, a big challenge, and one cannot really give ready answers. The government does not really, as things stand, the policy atmosphere doesn't really look at fishers as an important stakeholder on the beach. On the coast, and that means that we have an uphill task in trying to convince the government of the need to allow people to not only live there but also to have rights. Rights is a word that scares people, but to have some rights, some kind of rights to the resources, so that they could actually allow those resources to be used equitably and sustainably, even for the benefit of the nation at large. So I don't think currently we have any ready answers to that question, but that is a challenge every one of us must be dealing with, entangling ourselves with, if we want to make any change in the coast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. M. Jayakumar, who has raised his hand, please.
Yeah, good morning. So good afternoon, sorry. So it's a wonderful presentation, Dr. Venkatesh. So I just want to ask you one question regarding the coastal fisher fluke community, and nowadays they're getting fishing also, it's very vulnerable, and by global warming and other impact, it will be making less fishing. So we are founding a very less fishing zone activities. So to improve that, already MSSRF are taking an initiation of development of coastal fisher fluke community by varying seaweed cultivation, fish farming, like that. So my question is is there any sea leasing policy has been undertaken by MSSRF or Ministry of Science and Technology or Ministry of Earth Science? Because I am in Gujarat, so I find some leasing policy is going through in Gujarat state. So is there anything policies be undertaken by other than Gujarat state, whether they'll be helping for giving a leasing to the fisher fluke community for engaging kind of seaweed farming or mariculture like that? I just want to this for answers, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a big question, and I don't know. For one thing, I don't know whether MSSRF has done anything in relation to leasing policy. But in principle, I'd say it is a solution more difficult, more dangerous than the problem. Leasing is very unlikely to give rights to people unless there are certain systems wherein the whole community can take advantage of this process. But at the moment, that kind of a thing does not happen. So when you start leasing resources out to private entrepreneurs, so to speak, because even fishermen become private entrepreneur once they start taking a place for lease. It again makes a common property into a private property. It brings in a lot of restrictions for access to other people. So it is, unless one looks more carefully into the artificial reefs and a lot of seaweed cultivation, they all need a certain amount of ownership of the resource, and unless one looks into how that might work in terms of the existing tenurial arrangements for other categories of people depending on the resources, they could be, I think, in a way more difficult, they are less an answer and more a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Next question from Ms. Ajanta De. Then we look at the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Venkatesh, and
No,
for
doctor,
taking us.
doctor, don't call me Mr.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
Dr.
yeah, I know.
Venkatesh. Only doctor will respond. No. Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, Venkatesh, for taking us to this historical journey of how the development policies has influenced. I just want to know that as a CSO, we can really work on the co-management, as you have rightly said. How do you see the role of the young fishers, like the younger generations? How to motivate them into this entire journey for rights-based or for looking at how they are looking at the envisioning their role as fishers in the younger generation, how they are looking at it, and also in comparison with the social aspirations. Because when we talk about Biksit Bharat and all, so we have certain social developmental models that the government policies are looking at, and how these social aspirations are looking at this co-management. If you can deliver on this part a little bit, it would be nice for us to understand.
Again, each of these questions will require a whole full presentation in itself. I'll quickly say one thing. Fishers, especially younger fishers, have lost confidence. What we are dealing with right now is a loss of confidence in the sector's ability to provide meaningful livelihoods. With a lot of external influences working on fishing, people are willing to put in the hard work required, but provided there is some benefit, some incentive for putting all that, doing all that. Unfortunately, people have lost confidence. Even if one day you find a boat earning something like 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs of income, they are not sure that they would want to go fishing the next day for fear that there might not be anything to catch. If you look into the history, again, 1990s and early 2000s, when a fisherman earned a certain amount of money, there is a windfall from fishing, he would invest in new nets. If the money is more, he would invest in a new boat. He would invest in something or the other in relation to fishing. And that is one reason why you find a large number of fishing households lacking ownership of the land in which they live today, because they never bought land, they never thought land as an important asset, but they had enough confidence in the activity itself, in fishing itself. They, even now you will hear many people calling it an ATM. The sea is our ATM, so to whatever we cannot get. But the number of people who believe that sea to be an ATM is declining, whereas there is a cynicism amongst people about the capacity of the sea to generate enough, to provide enough to keep them going. And I think the first step to your question, I can only give you one first step, which is basically to try and generate, put in place mechanisms to enhance people's confidence in the resource, which is premised upon their access to the resources. And that again brings me back to the point I was trying to make about the commons. And the commons are being increasingly alienated. In such a situation, how do you put in place any confidence building measures? So it's all a vicious circle. But for all that, I think the most important thing to get people back into fishing would be to develop their confidence in the activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we look at the chat box?
Yeah. So
Okay.
we have one question. This is actually
This is beyond the, one of the comments is beyond the, no, let me look at it. Okay, he says that how do you see the implementation of the Forest Act 2006 in the coastal landscapes, given that the vast tracts of coastal land in India could fall under the classification of the for forest land in securing the rights of fishers and conserving the coastal resources through democratic decentralization? This has come from Sengati Vanan. Yeah.
It's an important area actually. Forest Rights Act is one thing that when we did the study on tenure, we were looking at it and we were trying to suggest that as a way forward in terms of providing space for the fishers in the management systems and in providing rights to them to the resources. There is a potential for that, but the one conclusion we drew from 20 years of the Forest Rights Act being around, or whatever, 10 or 15, whatever, is that it's good on paper, but we have found very few evidences that it has actually led to practical implementation, especially from a coastal marine fisheries perspective. And we still see that, I still suggest that it would be an area that we should be exploring more seriously. And probably that is one of the very few policy openings we have to enhance people's legislative openings we have to enhance people's access to rights and resources. Thank you.
The next is from Anbuvahini. She's actually agreeing with some of the points you've said, that recognizing women as fishers in India is critical for inclusive gender-based politics. And then there is Sahana Lakshmi, who says, who's thanked you and who said the detailed presentation on things that are obvious but that requires a sense of the uncommon. Do we have any more comments? Okay. So.
This is Dr. Gopalakrishnan from Annamala University.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Yes, sir.
Venkatesh, I think you remember me. I was with MSSRF during post-tsunami. See, my question is that if you say fishermen or women, I hope generally we mean for a traditional fisherman, but generally marginalized, more marginalized, or acutely marginalized fishermen or fishers or tribal and Dalit fishers. Generally, we don't give importance for them. And regarding that is the one, the clarification or some comments from your side, since you are a rich experience with the community. And the schemes and everything that generally pumped or towards the traditional fishers. And another one is regarding this deep sea conversion of the onshore and the boat into deep sea vessel. That is going to be some sort of impact. What may be your comment on that, the anticipatory impact on the fishermen? These are the two things I want to listen to you, Dr. Venkatesh.
Again, thank you so much for the doctorate. If not MS Swaminathan Foundation, then at least Anna University should be looking at giving me an honorary doctorate. Your first question relating to the Dalits and other marginalized people in the fishing activity, I agree they are not really always, they do not always receive the due. The voluntary guidelines on small scale fisheries, or SSF guidelines as we call them, has a category called vulnerable and marginalized groups. And in that category, what we have been trying, what I have tried to do, and what some of my colleagues in small scale working in fisheries have tried to do, is to expand the scope to bring in precisely the kind of people you mentioned, the ethnic categories, the gender categories, and people who have been ignored in our broader definitions of small scale fisheries. The challenges being faced by small scale fisheries in the broad, at the level we actually accept them itself is so huge that it is possible that we are ignoring some really poor people. But there are areas of work that we still need to do, and that includes the people of a non-fishing caste origin but living on small fisheries as a livelihood for for generations. And I think that I'll tell you this: when we did the study on older fishers in fishing, older people in fishing communities, our understanding was it would require a bit of literature review and putting together a paper. But when we actually looked into the literature and started asking questions of different people with experience, we realized that older people in fishing communities never received any attention, or at least they received so little attention that nobody quite knows what older people are like and what their situation is like in the fishing communities. So when you know that nearly 30% of a fishing community comprises older people, and they have been left out of all this development and research processes, you can imagine the amount of ignorance that prevails about other categories, and about without whom we all must probably start looking more intensively. The second question, deep sea convention. As I said, a lot of small scale fishers are already fishing in the deep sea. Tuttur obviously is an important example from Tamil Nadu, South Tamil Nadu. They have always been fishing in the oceanic waters, and a lot of fishers, whether it is in Andhra Pradesh or Odisha or in Tamil Nadu, they have been fishing in offshore and deep sea fisheries. And the deep sea conventions and conversations at the national level, policy conversations in particular, apparently try to ignore the small scale fishers. They say small scale fishers do not have the capacity to go into the deep sea. So the extent to which they can have access to the deep sea resources is not really that important an issue. And people focus more on industrial vessels, motorized, mechanized vessels, industrial ships. But it is a fact of life for the past 20-25 years at least that small fishers are going into the deep sea and fishing there, and they need a stake in the when it comes to sharing the cake amongst the different stakeholders. And I think again this is where people like us will need to make sufficient noise to ensure that the small scale fishers' stake in the deep sea resources is well established and accepted in the convention. Thank you.
Yeah, but see, the thing is that Dr. Venkatesh, if in the convention of this deep sea vessel, the owners, I think my worry is that the owner become a labor in future, right? They cannot, all the boat owners cannot convert their boat into deep ocean, deep sea vessel. Then that is one way of impact of deep sea fishing. Converting a owner into a labor, that may also possible. And another one thing regarding this non-traditional fishers we used to call conveniently for Dalits and tribals. In your Andhra Pradesh they are Yanadi, I think so, and in Tamil Nadu there is Irula tribes. When I was in MSSRF as a scientist during post-tsunami scenario, we used to represent continuously to the the district administration to include them in Nagapattinam district and also Kadalur district. We used to facilitate that, including this excluded marginalized communities. That is, the credit goes to M.S. Swaminathan Foundation. Of course, I was there that time, and not only me, even that tsunami team we represented. It was they listened to us. They included as a they are also the affected target during the tsunami. Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions? Anybody else? Okay. If we don't have any further questions, I'd like to sum up today's discussions. It has been a very enriching talk by Venkatesh, where he has traced historically how the entire, they told us about the importance of the fishing commons and how things changed in the name of development, and what are the challenges today being faced by the fishers. In fact, we had a meeting a month or so ago here where fishers came and represented the fact that the Tiruvanmiyur beach is being made into a blue beach, because of which the fishing settlements around cannot really undertake their activities. So, and that's when we realized that the Chennai Corporation, the fisheries department and all do not talk to each other. They work in silos, and the fisheries department unfortunately sees itself only as a delivery agent of schemes for fishing communities, not as advocates for the communities. So these are some of the things I think which you have very rightly highlighted also in your talk about how we need to address this, and this has definitely given us a lot of pointers in terms of way forward. And it's been and I would like to thank everybody who joined in the discussion and made it so enriching. So thanks so much. And So that's, we hope, Venkatesh, we will be able to engage again with you on some of the, on a talk, and if not, have some other kind of ways in which we can work together on fisheries. So
Next
thanks.
time you must give me a doctorate, otherwise I'm not going to be
Okay.
anything more.
No,
It's a
MSSRF
doctorate for good
is-
that I must keep. I should be able to keep it. Once you give it to me, I won't give it to I won't return it again.
MSSRF will be quite generous that way. Even I am called doctor often. So,
Okay.
so thank you, everyone. So, and thanks for HCL Foundation. Anybody? Yeah. So thank you. With this, I would like to close the discussion for today, and we hope we'll see you again in the next webinar series. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.